Parsha Ponderings. I'm here with Rabbi Hamilton, Rabbi Bonnie Cohen, and Rabbi Starr, getting ready for both Shabbat HaGadol, Parsha Tzav this week, and also, of course, Pesach coming up. One thing I was curious to talk with you all about is this continued discussion of what someone does when they've sinned, and how our Parsha gives us this opportunity to imagine the process of public accountability for an individual. So a person, if they sin, they have to identify it for themselves, and then they have to be made known of it, and they have to bring an offering, and eventually that offering is eaten by the Kohanim, by the priests, which feels to me like it's not only this person doing a process of internal teshuva, but also trying to turn that malpractice, that misdeed, into something that can be useful to the public. So I wanted to offer that and see what you all think about that.
It's a really powerful question, Talia, and I really appreciate it. There's a public conversation right now, or maybe it's a semi-private conversation. I don't know where it falls in these things, but on social media around some of these questions right now, around what does teshuva look like? What does when somebody has wronged, especially in a public way, how does that process of repair and accountability take place? And I really appreciate this notion that teshuva is not just something that happens internally, that certainly that is where it begins, I think. But that there is something external as well, and in fact, it's received. It's also an interesting component of this, right? As those priests eat that offering, it's received. It's a marker of it being also going in both directions. That it's offered by one and received by another. We know that that's not always the case. That sometimes people don't want to forgive their offender, and they have the right to not forgive. But in terms of this process of teshuva, of having kind of a public action accompany this internal process, feels really important for our own accountability, for holding one another accountable to our behaviors.
Really lost something by not having that public space to have what you could, on some level dismiss or minimize as ritualistic public behavior. But I think that's sort of a one-dimensional way of thinking of it, in the sense of, I think teshuva is really hard. It's really painful. The person who has hurt somebody, they're damaged by it, in the sense of the kind of the self-corruption of what it means to sin, what their shame, their sense of repression, whatever's involved in that side of it. There's something really damaging. And obviously the victim to live with the hurt and the fear of maybe confronting somebody. I mean, the whole thing is painful. And the fact that we don't have some sort of outlet like a korban, I mean, I think makes it in some ways a much more lonely, intimate, scary process. And I think that's just, that needs to be sort of named as a loss. It's hard to. It would be wonderful to have some way in which the burden of either being a sinner or of being a victim was sort of taken up in some sort of other way.
These are excellent points, Talia. I'm really glad you've raised the point and what everybody's expressed, Rabbi Bonnie Cohen, Rabbi Starr. I think that in classic form, the way it's accepted, if it's acceptable, because it may not be, and it often is not, is with genuine regret, a confession, a public confession, and some sort of determination not to do it further, or not to repeat it. I would add one thing maybe to what we're talking about in terms of the absence of a korban, the absence of the availability of a kind of a public space ritual, the way the Torah describes. I would add the idea that what replaces the korbanot is essentially learning and learning about them. We actually see in the text that sometimes when we describe and recite the offerings, it's as if we've brought them. It's not sufficient, but I know that when I have wronged somebody or when I've been wronged by somebody, I am more persuaded by a fourth step, not just the remorse, not just the confession, not just the determination to not do it again, but when I become convinced that the person who has wronged me has genuinely learned something they didn't know. They've actually grown. They've actually become a aware of something in a genuine way, not in a opportunistic way, but in a genuine way. When they actually know something that they didn't know before and convince me that that's so, or if I am the wronger and I do that with another, then that amounts to something. And it's not the same as a korban, as an offering or a public display, but it would almost be a fourth thing that would make me more inclined to say, okay, it has actually changed them in some substantial way.
So as we're clearing out chametz from our physical lives and our spiritual lives, I want to wish everyone a Zis and Pesach, a sweet Passover, and a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good Shabbos and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.